Good morning, MBH fans. It is October the 15th. We are just a little over 2 weeks away from Halloween. And if you've been a fan of MBH for a while, then you know how we typically do things here on the show. Generally speaking, we record something spooky around that spooky time of year. We release that new episode to patrons for those who have the $10 tier and above. And we release last year's spooky recording to everyone else on the feed. This is that spooky recording that we released last year on the feed. It's a little different. The introduction to the episode will explain kind of what it is. It's not your typical D&D. It's really not role-playing at all. It's just an interesting little spooky story compilation we put together for you. But we wanted to release this to everyone now because on Halloween... and actually, over the next couple of weeks, we are going to be releasing a true blue D&D Halloween special that I think you guys are really going to enjoy. I enjoyed it a lot, and I think that you all will enjoy listening to it. So the plan is to release it on Halloween and the week before Halloween. So part 1, a week before Halloween, part 2 on Halloween day. So you can have that to look forward to. Also, if you're a patron at the $10 tier, we released the first part of our Avatar Legends game that we did recently. So you can go check that out now if that's something you might be interested in. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for sticking around. We see you guys still listening. We're still communicating with you on social media and Discord and all that stuff. And we truly hope to have the epilogue ready for you guys soon. And then maybe something new in the new year. But enough from me. Now time for some spookies. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this very special presentation of Make Believe Heroes. We were not able to record our typical Halloween special this year. I've had a lot going on. I think I mentioned that in the episode that went out recently to everyone else. But we did want to have something for our patrons special this year. So this was actually an idea that Alan came up with. And what we have is we have a collection of spooky stories as told by different characters within the world and setting of Make Believe Heroes. So, obviously, this is not canonical. None of this really fits, and some of these characters would have no reason to be where they are. But essentially, these characters are all sitting around a fire, and they are giving some of their very best spooky Halloween-y stories. So sit back, turn the lights down low, and listen to the spooky stories of Make Believe Heroes. Well, hello, friends. Thank you all for joining me around the campfire tonight. It is, of course, my favorite time of the year. That, of course, being the eve of All Hallows. It is a night for spirits and tricks and treats, of course, if you're good, as well as some spooky things. My brothers and sisters and I used to sit around every year and tell the spookiest of stories. And I was just wondering, I've come to know some of you, different depths of knowing. And I was just wondering if maybe you all might have a story or two for me. It is Halloween, as some call it, or I've heard it called. Well, truthfully, it's something I've come up with on my own, and I'm hoping it'll pick up some traction. Perhaps you can help me for this All Hallows Eve. Do you have a scary story to tell around the fire as it crackles in the night? Mogert, why don't you regale us with one of your stories from the drylands, or the mountains, or wherever a champion of the gods might have traveled?
Ghost stories, eh? Well, Mogert Stonefire has a ghost story for you. It all started back... I don't remember when, actually. But that's not important. The important part is the story. So, one time, I woke up in a room. There was a fire lit in the room, turned down low, but it was there. Fire, crackling. The door locks on its own. No one can get away. You're tied down to the bed, but not by ropes. What is it? No one knows. No one's there. You fight and turn, and no one can help you. You scream, and no one hears you. Why would they do this to you? Why would they throw you in a bed and then lock the door and have the fire? And it's so nice. And then they're just stabbing you over and over in the back. Why would they do this? And then you hear a bell. You think, oh, this is it. This is my savior. This is who will save me from this horrible, horrible nightmare. But no. It does not save you from it. There's no salvation in this torture room. You have to sit there and endure it. Over and over. Your back stabbed. But no blood. But you are being stabbed. And then it's over. Again, you hear nothing. You see nothing. Is anyone there? There's no ropes. Nothing was holding you. No one is in the room but you. And a fluffy dog. Then you hear, shh. It will send shivers down your spine. And the only thing you can do is roll over and go to sleep. Because when you're in a situation like that, and that does happen to you, you fight so long, it just wears you out. But you wake up in the morning and realize it happened to everyone. Your comrades, they all endured this. But what was it? No one will know. No one. So, next time you're in the mountains and you think, oh, that's a nice little house. Oh, I wonder who lives there. Maybe we should run in there and hide. Maybe we should get away from these bad people in this beautiful home that's very beautiful, and it had all the shutters, and it had the fence, and it had the chairs on the front porch. It was a very nice place. It had really good food. But they don't tell you about the massage ghost. So be warned. Next time you're in the mountain, don't trust a dog with a little bell. Well, you can trust him. He's actually very nice. But if you do trust him, there's a chance you will meet this ghost. But you will not see this ghost because you can't see ghost. Okay? Anyways, that's my ghost story. It's the scariest thing that's ever happened to me.
Aha! Well, that certainly was a story. Chimilil, why don't you share a story with us, if you would? Surely you've encountered some amazing things on your trails.
So here we are gathered round the fire. You would like to hear a scary story? Well, I have one for you. One night, I was seeking an ancient tome deep in the dark forest, in a tomb within the dark forest. Did I mention that the forest was dark and that the tomb was macabre? Of course, those are important details. So, I had a torch as I went through the cemetery. Did I mention the tomb was in a cemetery? I mean, maybe that doesn't need to be mentioned. I don't know. But usually tombs are in cemeteries. But sometimes there are lone tombs, like for a king or a prince or somebody who's really cool. They get a tomb. It's not in the cemetery with all the plebes. But this one was a cemetery with all the plebes. But this one also had this fancy tomb for this one person. Did I mention this one person was creepy when they were alive? Well, they were. They were quite creepy when they were alive. But now they're dead. And their tomb is creepy. Just as creepy as they were in real life. If not more so. Because a tomb makes it creepy. And it was creepy already. So a tomb and that's creepy squared. Did I mention I studied math in Vent Haven before I dropped out and sold my soul to a sheepless person? Well, that's neither here nor there. That's a spooky story in and of itself. But you've already heard that one, most likely. So, anyway, I was going through the tomb with my torch, and I found a room. And you know what was in this room? Dust and spider webs, cobwebs, and also shadows. I mean, and the torch, the torch flickers, and when the torch flickers, that makes the shadows flicker, and that makes it creepy, right? Yeah, y'all are creeped out, I can tell. So, I was in this room, and there were passageways that led to other rooms. And I went into one room, and there was a sarcophagus. That is a fancy name for a casket, but, made out of like stone, I guess. And I thought maybe the tomb tome would be in there. Sometimes creepy people would be buried with their magic tomes that revealed the secrets of the universe. So I set the torch in a sconce on the wall nearby and began to push with all of my strength, with all of my back. Always push with your back. I learned that from somebody who had a bad back. Unrelated. Push with your back really hard. Oh, that's what I did. And slid the lid off the sarcophagus. And when I did, there was a mummy. And of course, mummies are nothing to be afraid of. They're just dead people wrapped up in bandages, embalmed and all that. But this mummy sat up, and so I ran. I forgot to grab my torch, but thankfully, I have dark vision, so I could still see okay. Just didn't feel as creepy because of the flickering torch, I should note, I did, before I ran in fear, note that the mummy was not holding a tome. So, no tomb tome with a mummy. So then I went into another room, and laying on a bed, hooked up to some fancy machinery, was a green corpse. It looked like it had been sewn together. And naturally, I thought, this machinery, maybe it is hiding the tome somewhere, and I have to activate it. So I flipped the lever, lightning struck, and the machine hummed to life. The corpse on the table, did I mention it had giant bolts sticking out of its neck? Well, it sat up and looked at me, and it said,
"I'll be Frank. You should run."
And I was like, "Thanks, Frank. I will run." And ran I did. I went into another room, and this time it felt like a castle, like somehow the tomb trappings changed to a castle. I don't know how that happened, but happen it did. And whenever I saw the castle, I thought, this is rather fancy. There were candelabras instead of sconces. Have you ever seen a candelabra? Candelabras are fun. Anyway, there was a casket, a fancy casket. And I thought, well, maybe the tome is in there. It wasn't in the sarcophagus, but the casket is a little different from a sarcophagus. Maybe it's better able to preserve paper. And when I opened the casket, there was a Dracula. And he sat up and said, "Bleh." And I said, "Oh no." And so I ran away. Finally, I kept walking, and I was back in the tomb, but it was flooded. And I thought, how did this tomb get flooded? Normally you would make precautions to not flood your tomb so that you wouldn't, floating bloated corpses. Those are bad. You don't want those. You don't want to be those. But then I found out, there is a creature here in this black lagoon. How did I find that out? Well, it approached me and said,
"Yo, what up? I'm a creature from a black lagoon."
And I'm like, well, is this a black lagoon? And he's like,
"Well, no, the black lagoon is above us. It just flooded the chambers here, and I fell down into the tomb."
And I'm like, "Are you okay with that?" And he's like,
"Yeah, that's fine."
And I'm like, "Okay, well," and then I left. Sadly, I never did find the tome. And that's the scariest part. Knowledge that is lost to history.
Well, that was certainly in the Halloween spirit. What of you, Kellen? have a scary story to share.
It's an autumn evening as you sit in a field, and the wind is blowing, and the trees are rustling as a leaf falls down from a tree, a beautiful bright auburn color. You know this as fall time in Fallen Grove. You've been part of the Leaf Guard for quite some time, probably about 5 years now. You and two of your friends joined together under the premise of trying to protect Fallen Grove during the hard times that it has faced. Your friend, Samantha, who is a gnomish girl, about 3 foot, and your friend, Albert, as he is also a gnome. You all joined together in hopes of just helping the forest grow and doing your duty as druids, and you wanted to do your best to prove yourself to the rest of your family and your friends. You've been sent out by the uppers in the Leaf Guard to hunt down what has been known as a terrifying thing, an owlbear. Recently, it's throughout the many towns and such in Fallen Grove, and it has been causing trouble for locals. And so you've been sent out to kill this owlbear. The only thing is, the owlbear actually lives in a denser part of the forest. One that not a lot of people go through, but, hunters do go through often. But besides that, it's paths less traveled. You begin to walk through, and as you see that the wind starts to change, and the trees start to get a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker, so to speak. And as your friend Albert, he kind of leads the way. He's the navigator, and he says, we should probably head this way. I think I might have seen some tracks that might have pushed us a little bit quicker. I think we might have found some tracks that belong to the owlbear. You head off into a cut-off path of the actual main road, and you start to travel, and you notice the trees around you start to kind of change. They no longer look straight or look tall, but they almost look like they are beginning to shroud you even more. And you notice that, just like Fallen Grove, the canopy is thick, and you can rarely see the sky, but this almost seems like it's pushing down on you. The trees become not just straight, but they begin to kind of bend and are crooked. And this is nothing strange to you. You've been in parts of the forest that seem like this, but it's almost unsettling as your heart flutters just a little bit. Samantha says, oh, well, this is a little bit nerve-wracking. This is kind of creepy, but let's keep pushing forward. As you begin to push forward, you start to notice that the wind has kind of stopped. And you think maybe it's just due to all the trees and the thick vegetation. It might be due to that. But you notice that it gets eerily quiet. Samantha notices that behind her, it just seems... Samantha looks over at you and says, wow, this is starting to get a little unsettling. Let's be on the lookout. I've not been able to see any kind of wildlife around here. And you take a look around and you realize that it has become dark quite quickly. You all left around evening time, and so you expected the sun to set, but you didn't expect it to set so fast. You all begin to traverse even further into the forest, and that's when you hear an unsettling low growl. You turn around and you think you see an owlbear, but you're not sure if your mind is beginning to play tricks as you kind of reach out into the forest and try to find anything that seems like it might have malicious intent. And you're shocked to notice that everything around you seems to have malicious intent. It seems like the trees itself do not want you here. This is not something that you've ever felt before. As you begin to tremble with fear, Albert looks at you and is quite scared, but he says, we have to keep pushing. We have to go forward. You all begin to make your way, and it begins to get deeper and deeper into the forest. The vegetation is harsh. The landscape is harsh. As you come upon a cave, that is underneath a large oak tree. Probably the largest oak tree you've ever seen, as its roots grow deep into the cave and are over top of the cave's mouth. You all begin to look at the tracks, and it leads directly into this cave. Albert looks at you and says, "This looks like we're probably where we need to be. Let's prepare ourselves." As you all begin to draw your swords and your bows, Albert pulls out a long sword as you pull out a short bow, and Samantha pulls out 2 daggers. You all begin to make your way into the cave, and you notice that this cave opens up quite large. It's almost as if the cave itself shouldn't be this big, considering how small of an entrance it was. You all don't see any signs of an owlbear, but you begin to traverse forward along a small path inside the cave's mouth. As you get closer and closer, you start to have these thoughts, these memories. Was Albert really your friend that you grew up with? You don't really remember a lot about Albert. You don't remember a lot about Samantha. In fact, did you ever even really join the Leaf Guard? You look down as you see that for a brief second, it's almost like time distorts itself. And you're not wearing Leaf Guard armor. You're wearing regular clothes. But it quickly switches back. As you become uneasy, you take a deep breath and you stop. Albert looks back at you and says, "Are you okay? Is everything okay?" And you look at Albert, and for a brief second, you notice a little bit of a twinge of a twitch as his head kind of twitches to the left and seems like something's off. He says, "I know you're probably scared. It's okay. We just need to get a little bit further into this cave. I'm sure that the owlbear is close." As you all begin to go deeper into the cave, it opens up, and there's candles everywhere, and there is an altar. As you're confused and kind of don't realize what's going on, you begin to feel yourself drawn to this. You begin to walk up closer to it. As you put your hand down on it, you remember now. Almost as reality sets itself into place, you look down and you notice you're not wearing Leaf Guard armor. You're wearing regular clothes. Your hands are not holding a short bow. In fact, your hands are tied together. As you turn around, your friends that you thought you knew for so long, Albert and Samantha, they're draped in a black cloth. Your heart sinks. What you thought was going to be a fun adventure with your friends, your mind was tricked. There was no owlbear. There was nothing that needed to die. The only thing that was going to die was you. As you're pushed down with such force onto this altar, your hands bound, the friend that you once thought was Samantha grabs hold of your legs and chains them to the altar. Your hands, she changed those too, as they begin to say a little incantation, and they drive a dagger through your heart. You're not sure what it amounted to, how you could be so fooled into thinking that you were going on an adventure. Things just aren't as they seem in Fallen Grove.
Professor Margaret Cavendish here. I also have a ghost story, if you wouldn't mind for me to tell it. So this story is a story that my father used to tell around campfires when I was growing up. Once upon a time, there was a cave. The cave was out on its own, on a small peninsula on the outskirts of Vent Haven. It was forbidden to go to this cave due to tales of people never returning. Some people said you could even hear screams coming from the cave. One night, a group of students from the college decided to check it out. They snuck out, taking shortcuts and alleyways so they wouldn't get caught. Once they made it to the opening of the cave, they lit some lanterns they had brought, and one by one they went in. The smell was horrendous. There were bones lying around. Rats and small creatures ran the floors between their feet. As they ventured further in, the sounds stopped. The dripping water silenced. The air turned cold. The puddles of water on the floor turned to ice. The group of friends huddled closer as a fog surrounded them, starting at their feet. Then they were held in place. There was nothing in the fog as far as they could tell, but they were held by something. Then a voice of an old woman rang out.
You thought you were brave when you came to this cave, but how will you be the day you die at sea?
As those words ended, the students began to choke on the seawater that filled their lungs. They clawed and groveled, holding their throats like they were drowning. When suddenly it stopped. As they all slowly got back to their feet, coughing and breathing heavy, an old lady with bright white eyes walked toward them, hunched over, cane in one hand, and seaweed hanging from her clothes and hair.
Breaking the rules. That'll get you killed, my dears. But fortunately for you, your time is not spent. Go, enjoy your lives and leave me be. I am the voice of the sea, and I will claim what's promised to me.
Then they woke up. As the waves crashed on the shore, looking around, they realized they weren't in the cave, but they couldn't remember how they ended up lying on the beach. Was it a dream? Or did the voice of the sea send them here? No, they were still in Vent Haven, but as they went toward the location of the cave, they realized it wasn't there. And that was the end of the story that my father told me. I took it upon myself to investigate this story as I got older, and the cave is there. I've not been in it, but I have seen it. My father could never see it again after going in it that one time with his friends. It seems like once you talk to the voice of the sea, you can never speak to her again. Unfortunately, she did tell my father and his group of friends how they would die. They would all pass away from drowning at sea in a horrible boat expedition for the College of Vent Haven. So the voice of the sea, well, she did get what was promised to her.
Ooh, I do love a good scary cave story. Speaking of Vent Haven, I think I actually have one I'd like to tell myself. But beware, this is no light tale, but one of truest horror. In my earlier years, during the days of the War of Light, the first days, I would sometimes retire myself to the coast. There was a young couple, Marcus and Marie, if I remember correctly, elves both, who lived in a small cottage just up from the sea. Their home sat right up from the dunes at the first steps of the crags east of the valley of Vent Haven. They were sweet, the couple, and they were always very accommodating to me. After weeks at war, it was comforting to return to such a simple place for rest and recovery. They fed me, gave me a small room of my own, and at sunset we would often sit out by the sea, and I would regale them with stories of our great victories in the War of Light. It was a home, even for someone like myself, where home is hard to define. But the comfortable cottage was not without sorrow. Betimes, I could hear Marie at night crying softly as her husband cooed, trying to soothe her. They were without a child, despite their great desire for one. I think that might have been the cause for their kindness, even if I was older than either of them. Once, I sought their comfort after a particularly harrowing day with a sister of mine. Ugly business, that. I was trained, wounded, struggling, and so I came to the cottage at sunset, and I found Marie standing alone at the shore. I remember now. She wore a simple white dress, the cool water lapping at her feet. As I approached, I could see the drooping of her shoulders, the shaking of sobs through her back. "Marie, my dear, what troubles you so?" I asked her. She continued staring forward, her shoulders shaking. I approached, placing a hand on her back to comfort her. But as Marie turned, I saw that she was not crying. Her eyes were wide and sharp, and her beautiful face was split in a harrowing, wide grin. Her chest spasmed in laughter, but no sound came forth from her other than the wheezing of her breaths. I tried to shake her free of this stupor, but as I did, blood and tears ran down from her widened eyes. The corners of her mouth cracked at the peaks of her maddened grin. "Marie, where is Marcus? Where is he? You need help, dearie." Shaking with crooked laughter, she lifted her hand and pointed north toward the crags on the eastern side of her cottage. Trailing the mark of her pointed finger, even in the dim light of the sun, I could see something, a figure. It was not tall, but short, like a child. Only its features were wrong, distorted, pale-skinned, raven-haired. It stood naked in the shadow of the crags. Its eyes were sunken and dark, but that was not the prominent feature of the child thing. The bottom half of its face was stretched and twisted into a gnarled grin. As my emerald eyes fell on this thing, its head twisted, cocked ever so slightly to the left. Over the distance, I heard a single barking laugh, like some dark beast from the heart of the Crooked One. With haste, I flew toward the creature, but as the shadows lengthened over it in the setting sun, the youngling thing was gone. I searched the brush and the growth all around the dunes, but there was no sign of the thing. Just as I thought I'd give up, the sun now sunken behind the horizon, I caught the strangest scent. Blood, salt, and lilac. A short walk into the crags, I found a small ring of stones. There were lilacs scattered around the stones, not haphazardly, but placed with care. And in the center, a small hand-carved doll. The doll was simple, seemingly made from a shell-like material, almost porcelain. I knew at once. This was a grave. I picked up the doll, and beneath it, a scroll written with blood. "Smile, my darling, and return to us." I didn't dig beneath the stony circle. I didn't need to. I knew what rested beneath those dark stones. I returned to the sea to find Marie and Marcus both. They had drowned, face down in a mere inches of seawater, their faces frozen in a wide, cheek-rending grin. "Smile, my darling, and return to me."
So it's Brackle's turn. I'm not scared by much. Not much spooks me. I've spent my whole life mostly alone in the wilderness near Branshire, and being out in the dark, in the woods, in the fields, in the hills and hollers around that area, spending nights in caves. It's not a thing to me. But I'll tell you one time, something did scare me. Something that to this day I cannot explain. I was out on a long hunt, and as I was going about my hunt, I was also checking some traps that I'd lain and resetting those that had been tripped by, just old age or whatever. However, they were replacing and repairing those that needed it. And I was going through some dark woods, and in the distance, I started hearing hounds barking, howling, but it was far in the distance. I had to stop and listen really closely to make sure that's what I was actually hearing. And I'm certain it was. I trust my ears. So I was going about my business thinking, well, somebody's on a hunt and they're scaring off whatever prey I was looking for that night with the howling and carrying on of these hounds. But so I was trying to move away from them, trying to go somewhere where I wouldn't be disturbed. I was close to time for me to set up a hammock in the trees and sleep for the rest of the night. But the further I went, the louder the faint sounds of the hounds became. I tried doubling back. I tried adjusting my course. I tried waiting. When I waited, it stayed the same. But as I moved, no matter which direction and which path I took, the hounds closed in on me. It felt like they were all around me, and yet I never saw them. I never saw tracks. I never saw their eyes through the trees. I never saw spoor or any sort of, all the things we trackers look for in the woods, broken branches, that sort of thing. And so I persisted until I found an abandoned house. It looked like an old manor, the kind of place a noble may have tried to set up for a hunting lodge in days past, but it had fallen on hard times, and in fact, trees had fallen on it. So this was a place I thought I could find shelter and wait out the hounds. The roof was dilapidated, and you could see the sky clearly. Before it had been overcast, but now the clouds had parted above this manse in the forest. And the moon. I could have sworn it was a new moon. I kept up with those things. It was necessary for tracking and hunting. But the moon was bright and vibrant and blood red. I was rattled. I thought, did I make a mistake? Was it just because of the overcast skies that I thought it was a new moon? No, I wouldn't make that mistake. The hounds have just been getting in my mind. So I went into the manor. I climbed the stairs and crawled through a hole in the roof to try to get a vantage point to see if I could see the hounds. And off in the distance, I could hear them still howling and carrying on. Yet, all the way to the tree line, I could not see any sign of them. Someone was on a hunt, and it was not me. I heard the sound of a branch crack, and I turned quickly, looked in the distance. Nothing was there. I heard another branch crack behind me, so I quickly did an about face. Still nothing. Finally, I looked up, and the moon itself had cracked. High in the sky, above the dark forests around Branshire. I had never been this rattled before. This was not natural. This was not even standard magical. I mean, I'm used to magic. There's mages, wizards and clerics all over. This was beyond any of them. And the moon continued to crack open. And from the crack emerged flies. Millions and millions of flies. They blotted out the moon. They blotted out the sky. I hopped back down the hole through the manse and ran down the stairs, ran out the front door, back through the trees. I was not having it. And as I ran and ran, I eventually came to another clearing, and there was the manse again. I was certain that I had not turned myself around. I was bolting, beelining, going straight, just trying to get away. And yet there it was again ahead of me, what had been behind me. And so I went back in. This time I went down into the basement, thinking maybe I can hide from it there. And down in the basement it was flooded. Still water. You don't want to mess with still water. Disease. Maybe even monsters, alligators, bloated corpses. You never know what you'll find there. So I went back up the stairs. This time I ran out the back door, and I ran as far as I could, as fast as I could, to the tree line, through the woods, and back to the mansion. It made no sense. Something was happening. Somebody was messing with me. The moon, I looked up, and the husk of it had shriveled and had fallen into two pieces, floating in the sky, disintegrating. Yet the flies persisted. They were everywhere. They had not yet reached the ground, but they were like a massive cloud, as if the sky were overcast, but with flies instead of whatever clouds are made out of. Rain, I guess. I didn't know what to do. All of my tracking skills, all of my hunting skills, they had all failed me. So I sat there on a chair in the den of that mansion. And I looked up on the wall and noticed for the first time a massive portrait above the hearth who must have been the lord of the manor. And it was a portrait of a skeleton. And some say that I am still stuck there to this day.
Well, perhaps you are, Brackle. Perhaps you are. What of you, Guy Clark? Have you any good stories to tell? Well, I'm not really super keen on scary stories, but okay, look, I mean, I do know one. This actually, it's kind of crazy. Growing up in the off-the-wall house, I mean, it was a big house, beautiful home, very wealthy. And myself and Vance and a couple of the other kids, we'd play games and we'd do different things. And, well, Vance and I, we were like brothers. I mean, we grew up in the same house together. And there was a room, I think it was on, if I'm remembering right, it was on the second floor. And it was just like a guest room, I suppose. I mean, I never knew anyone who lived in there. The room had these dolls in it. And I'll just be honest, I've always been a little creeped out by dolls, especially ones that either look too real or not realistic enough. I don't know. Something just about dolls. Vance and I, we would sneak around, and my mom, if she ever caught us in that room, she would run us out. Everything was like placed very carefully. And, well, there was this one little doll. It was strange. It gave me the creeps. We were in there playing hide and seek one time, and I crawled up underneath the bed to hide. Vance went and hid in one of the other closets. And we weren't supposed to be in this room. It was kept clean. My mom would always just say, like, don't be in there, don't mess it up, I don't have to clean it, et cetera, et cetera. Anyhow, so I crawl up underneath the bed and I'm waiting, and I can hear the other kids outside in the halls running through. I mean, I was probably, 6, maybe 7 years old. And I laid over and I leaned down to look out from under the bed. And when I did, one of the dolls was in the floor. not just in the floor, but sitting in the floor. And, well, but its legs and its bottom were sitting on the floor, and its body was laid over with its head on its side as if it was looking under the bed. And that freaked me out. Okay? Not going to kid around with you. I screamed. And when I did, Vance came running out of the closet. And when I did, the other kids come running into the room and they, we found you. And I came crawling out of from underneath on the other side. I backed out the other side of the bed and was freaking out. They're like, Guy, what's wrong? What's wrong with you? And it took me a minute. Finally, I said, the doll. And we went around and looked, and it was gone. Well, needless to say, I was not happy. And Vance, he never saw it. He came out from hiding soon after that. He was upset that I'd blown our cover. But they kept telling me that I imagined it, that it couldn't have been real, etc. But I know what I saw. It was a strange doll. Its head and everything, it was like perfect-looking porcelain almost. Strange. Anyhow, we went back to hiding. Well, they did. I never did much good after that. I hid in obvious places and stayed out of the dark. But once it came to be around bedtime, I went into Vance's room. I was going to Vance's room to tell him, rather, that I wanted to do something about that doll, to find it, to prove that I wasn't crazy. Of course, Lord Waldegrave caught me on the way and told me, "Now, Guy, you get yourself to your room right now," and all that. Sorry, I'm terrible accent, but I can't. I never have been able to. Anyway, so I waited till he went to bed, and then, wide awake, snuck into Vance's room, who was snoring. I woke him up and I told him, I said, let's go back up to that bedroom, let's find this doll, and let's get rid of it. So we did. We snuck off quietly through the house, creeped up the stairs. It was an older house, so the stairs were a little creaky, but not too bad. We slipped very quietly by all the other rooms where people were sleeping, servants' quarters and such, and we made it to the room with the dolls. We go inside, and the room is very dark. It's just a little bit of moonlight coming through the window. And like I said, there are a lot of dolls in there. The bed's made up with dolls, but in the window, not inside the window, but outside the window, there is a silhouette of something small, like a doll, seated on the windowsill, its head leaning over, cocked to the left. I froze. Vance looking around, going through the room. I'm trying to get the strength, the courage to speak, to tell him, to look, and finally he knows me. God, what's wrong with you? What's wrong? And all I could do was just quietly point. I pointed toward the window. And as Vance turned to look, the head of the doll fell forward and tink, right on the window. I went to scream, but Vance quickly throws his hand over my mouth. But then the head lifts and falls again. Tink, tink, tink. We fled. We ran out of the room. I mean, what else were we going to do? We ran down the hall, down the stairs, back to our rooms, and Lord Waldegrave comes right out of his office in a huff, angry, yelling at us. What are we doing, keeping us up? And we're frantic. We're trying to tell him, you have to come see Sir James. And finally, once he gets us to calm down enough, we go back upstairs. But there's nothing. No doll. The window's closed. There's no mark. We even went outside and looked on the ground outside of the window. There was nothing there. Well, needless to say, there wasn't much sleep going on. Finally, after a cup of hot cocoa, we went back to our rooms. I went back to mine. I laid down, I closed my eyes, and not long after, I heard the door open. I looked, and it was my mom. She come walking in. She sat down. I tried to pretend I was asleep. I think she knew better. But she leaned down and she kissed me on the forehead. And when she did, she said, "Here, son, I know you've been looking for it." And she slipped down underneath the blankets in my bed, a small, porcelain-headed doll.
So y'all want to hear a scary story from old Char? Well, I got a doozy for you. This one's been passed down through my family for generations. It goes like this. So, you're with your honey, and you're making out when the sending stone rings. You answer it, and the voice is, "What are you doing with my daughter?" You tell your girl, and she say, "My dad is dead." Then who was Stone? Huh?
Seriously, who even is this guy? And how did he get here?